Welcome to Paratruth. Holiday ghost stories have been passed down from one generation to the next since the medieval Icelandic sagas, but only gaining worldwide popularity after Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. However, the original tradition of telling scary ghost stories at Christmas time has died mainly due to verbal translation being lost, and the increase of joyful Christmas stories perpetuated in modern media. Today, we'll take a look at the origins of traditional Christmas ghost stories and see its evolution through time. Now Paratruth presents Scary Ghost Stories and Tales of the Glories. You're muted, Justin.
Guess it helps if I actually unmute myself. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Paratruth Reborn. This is a pre-recorded show on 107.7 FM New Orleans and the United Public Radio Network. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric.
And today, if you didn't get it by the intro, we're talking about scary ghost stories. Something that fascinates me is that scary stories used to be a thing of the past during this time of year, and I'm voting yes to bring it back because I feel it's one of those traditions that, well, I like scary stories to begin with, but point being is that it's something that we are losing. Telling stories over the Christmas year and all that stuff, and telling stories in general. I don't think we've ever done that when we were kids.
Telling ghost stories?
Yeah, during Christmas time.
No, I mean this is a type of tradition that's been pretty much gone out of modern history for quite a long time.
At least American history.
At least American history, yes. There are still ghost stories told around the world in various countries. But in America, again, everything's become so commercialized. Like when we think about Thanksgiving, we think about Halloween. Christmas is just another one of those holidays that have kind of moved away from the original, in this case, Christian tradition of Christmas, even further from the pagan tradition of Christmas. And we've moved into this modern life, like well before you and I were even born, in which it's all about Christmas presents and Santa Claus and joyful reindeers and all the little wonderful things that we can find on television and online. So naturally, I think with the introduction to media, and I feel like we've been talking about media a lot over the last couple of weeks here, but it's true. Like the modern age is so overwhelmed by the media. Like we're on our phones nearly 24/7.
Yep.
In most countries, and people who can afford to have that type of media in their pockets. And so we're constantly being bombarded by things, commercialized things, even to some extent being brainwashed in many ways. Believe it or not, I mean, how many times does a commercial tell us to purchase a certain item because these people are purchasing them? We see sports players, we see celebrities of various types that are trying to recommend us to different colognes or clothing and whatnot. And so, and the same thing is happening with the holidays and especially Christmas. They're telling us what kind of gifts we need, how our decorations should look, what our house should be like, what Christmas should feel like. And unfortunately, one of those things has not included, it has excluded the idea of the Christmas story.
For sure. And something that I think most people don't realize is this tradition actually goes back well before the written word. It was an oral tradition that nobody can really pinpoint per se when it was actually started. Um, Mostly because back then you were trying to fill the late evenings, dark time with something to do. And you didn't have electricity. All you had was fire, usually most of the time, um, unless you somehow knew magic, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole. Anyways, um, it wasn't until Victorian England that telling supernatural tales during Christmas went from an oral tradition to a written one, a timely trend, if you will. And this was partly due to the invention of the printing press
Mhm.
during the Industrial Revolution, where people were able to commercialize these ghost stories and bring them from their small towns that they grew up in to the bigger cities, and these stories started to grow. Now, telling horror-filled holiday tales was a family affair in England and other countries throughout the world, but this example is from England, even when they were read rather than spoken. Um, Eric, can you tell me who kind of revolutionized telling ghost stories in Victorian England?
Yeah, well, I believe that was Charles Dickens who ended up doing that by publishing a little known book, which is the A Christmas Carol, which I mean everybody knows. If you don't know A Christmas Carol, I I have no words for you. Um, it's only been adapted to dozens of movies and other versions of the original classic book. But you're right. It's one of those stories that have really revolutionized the idea of the modern ghost story. And it was something that was very and still is spooky for a lot of people. The idea of being visited by three ghosts, and one of the ghosts in particular is quite haunting. Um, which what is that? The ghost of the future, right? Kind of has the cloak, death look or feel.
Yeah, yep.
Um, but even then, like the story of A Christmas Carol is vastly different from what we understand the original Christmas scary stories to be that were
Oh, for sure.
verbalized and shared by word rather than by written word. But nonetheless, like this gives you a great opportunity to witness the idea of what some of those early stories might have been like.
And unfortunately, yeah, I don't know that you can really find a lot of those stories now. I mean, there are some that predate A Christmas Carol, of course. Um, However, it's one of those things that is lost to time because they weren't written at that time. Um, Dickens played a huge part in popularizing the genre in England, without question. Um, Dickens also helped shape Christmas literature by formalizing expectations about the themes like forgiveness and reunion during the holiday season. Uh, and who doesn't like to have that as a part of their lives year round, not just during the Christmas season? I feel we should all be forgiving and trying to have reunions throughout the entire year, not just during Christmas time. But this is the time of the year to do it. And surrounding the hearth and hearing these stories brought people together. And it's it's unfortunate that we've lost this, especially in the Americas, America, US, um, because it's one of those things that I feel would bring people together. Um,
I mean, it's definitely one of those things that would bring people together, or at least get us away from the TV and the commercialized stuff, and allow us to kind of enjoy the season the way it originally was intended from the very beginning, even before the Christian holiday, and even prior to the early pagan holidays of Christmas. These are stories that were literally told around a campfire. Uh, we would sit, yeah, because I was there too. But people would sit around these campfires and just tell these spooky stories. These stories would be haunting. They would haunt you through the Christmas season and well into the new year. And I think, jumping back, actually, one of the things you had mentioned is how forgiveness and all that should be year round. But I think one of the things that really contributes to Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol is the idea that Christmas is not only a celebratory time of year, but it's also the end of the year. It's our last time to think of the following year that we lived and what kind of things we can kind of find peace with. What can we change? What can we fix before going into the new year? Try to walk in with a clean slate. And I think that's kind of what he was trying to point to here. And the idea that ghosts would visit the character and help him to basically discern and define what his life is and what he needs to change. It kind of reminds me of just our natural world, like what many of us, or some of us at least, happen to know, which is there's this veil between the human life and that of the afterlife. And there are spirits out there trying to guide us, guiding spirits, God, angels, various, depending on your faith, whatever spirits you might be related to or working with. People are trying to help and encourage us in many cases to better ourselves. Now, that's not to say there's not spirits out there trying to do the opposite, because there very certainly are. But nonetheless, this particular story, A Christmas Carol, kind of helps define that relationship between what it's meant to be a human being and live life to the fullest versus just not caring and forgetting about the world and the people and the animals around you.
Okay, I'm going to get on a soapbox for 2 seconds. I
Okay.
promise it won't be long. You brought up Hollywood. Did you see that they're bringing out a real or a remake of How to Train Your Dragon, but
Yeah.
a human
Yeah.
version of it?
Oh yeah, I watched the trailer the other day, and it looks like it's
I
going to be a
just saw it today.
shot for shot thing. It's funny because there's actually people that I know who've been complaining because they're showing it that it's a shot for shot remake from the original animation, which is something that I've always wanted. Like the last few years, Disney especially has made these remakes, and they change the original story. They make it modernized. They make it,
Yeah.
they change the scenes and this and that.
But How to Train Your Dragon isn't even Disney.
No, it's
Is it?
Pixar. No.
Okay.
Or no,
Oh,
it's Dream. Is it DreamWorks?
DreamWorks. Yeah.
I don't know. There's plenty of people, and I agree. Like, I think they're just trying to gouge people's pockets. They just want to make money. They're doing more and more remakes, and instead of original content. It's because they're too scared. They don't know if original content's going to flop or not. And it's no longer about entertaining the world. It's about putting money in their pockets. So of course they're going to do a remake of one of the most popular animated movies of all time. Then yeah, they're going to do it. Same thing with Moana. Moana's getting filmed right now. My friend is working on it. So they're doing a live action Moana. They're doing if I'm not mistaken, they're doing a live action. What's the one with I can't think of the name. The one with the Elsa and Anna.
Frozen.
Frozen, yes. God, this is the most simple title. Can't even remember it. But yeah, so they're doing all these live actions because they know that people are going to pay into it and put money in the pockets of basically the runners of the companies.
Well, I can get the old movies. But they literally just came out with most of these movies that you're naming.
Well, yes. It's like they should have just started with the live action to begin with instead of doing the animation. But
right. Anyways, so many trends came from England to America during the Victorian era. A lot of traditions have come to the U.S. not just from Victorian England as well, but even Germany. They brought the Krampus traditions with them. Unfortunately, a lot of the U.S. doesn't celebrate with Krampus. Do you know where they usually have the Krampus festival here in the U.S.? I know they have it in Germany, of course, but there is one here, I think.
Yeah, there's a couple around. If I'm not mistaken, I think there's one down in New Orleans. If you guys, those of you listeners, I thought heard that when we were down there. Um, Savannah, I believe, has one as well.
Okay. Something that I find fascinating is we have I can't remember the exact name. It's a Dickens festival in Garrison, North Dakota. I really want to go this year. And they get dressed up in Victorian England, English garb and walk around. I don't know if they reenact anything or anything. That would be awesome if they did. To just because of this is what we're talking about. Just to see a Christmas Carol come to life, like right around you.
Right.
Like if I wanted to see a real world interpretation, I would love to be a part of the story, not just seeing it brought to life with real people.
Right.
But the tradition of telling ghost stories never really caught on in the U.S. Now, that's not to say that the U.S. didn't love A Christmas Carol, because they fell in love with The Christmas Carol, mostly because Dickens, at the time, was arguably the most famous writer in the world and was already popular throughout the world. Its success in the U.S. likely had more to do with Dickens himself than the story and the tradition. Let's put it that way. He had a huge fan base in the Americas, and incorporating the supernatural into Christmas was kind of frowned upon here in the U.S. Eric, maybe you can kind of correct me on this, but I feel that the fact that that America was discovered on the principles of religious freedom, and that a lot of Christians flocked here, is probably due to why we didn't adopt that, because there was this stigma about magic and superstition.
I mean, was there though, like, really, was it really established on religious freedom initially? I mean, technically, yes. Once we had the president
when
come
the
in and we had the
Pilgrims
government.
came,
Okay.
when the Pilgrims came, it was about religious freedom. When
Yes. Okay.
we had the Revolution, it wasn't about religious freedom
Well,
anymore.
when you consider when the colonists had arrived, the majority of them were all Protestant, and so the whole reason why, like, for example, Salem happened is because there was this Christian outlook, this Protestant outlook, where anything that wasn't of God was deemed evil. And if there was anything that seemed weird or suspicious, it was deemed evil. If you sneezed 2 times and cough, you were probably the devil, that type of thing. So yeah, it was pretty rough. And considering after this, like after the Salem witch trials, and it was around early 1700s, there was finally a commitment to all people within America to try to establish a new way of doing things and let go of the superstitions that had traveled over from Europe to the Americas, because there were so many people dying due to the superstition of witches and vampires and werewolves. And so when that happened, they wanted to try to push away. And we talked about this on our vampire episode, how the colonists, the Pilgrims, tried to push away the idea of superstition regarding most beings, except for the vampire, because there was some sort of scientific element to it that could be explained. And as a result, we just naturally kind of started to progress further and further away from the supernatural and focus more on the scientific based asset of life. And considering that the supernatural can't really be explained yet, here we are today. We got a lot of disbelievers, people who just don't. They could witness a ghost walk right past them and they won't believe it, because they can't prove it. So I think in this case, superstition has kind of drifted away from the Americas, and we're so focused now on what we can see, what we can touch, what we can taste, what we can, hear, that we just kind of forget about any aspect or idea of a ghost.
I just saw a ghost pass by your camera.
Yeah, that's
That's
not sure
Hellcat
not sure which
number
one that
one or
was.
number two.
Who is this? Oh, that's Salem. You know how I tell, like, so Salem's really skinny. He doesn't, like, when you look at the cats side by side, you can't really tell. But if you touch them, like, one is, you know, got some fat on him. The other one is just skin and bones. So
Well, I feel they're going to become a regular part of the show.
I think it's, yes, can't argue
It's
that.
inevitable.
I've tried to get them out, but they're persistent creatures.
So we're going to go over some stories that are from not like ancient times, but a little more recent in Victorian England. And then we'll touch base about where you can find these stories as a collection as well. Because I found, of course, late that there is a book out there that's got these all collected in there. And I decided to put a little presentation together for you all. So the first story is called The Old Nurse's Story by Elizabeth Gaskell. It was published in 1852. And it is a classic Gothic Victorian ghost story with ancestral secrets, organ music, and a haunted house. Doesn't go into why it was told during Christmas time. I'm assuming there's some pitch there about why it's told at Christmas time, but
Well, I mean, so there's no real evidence stating that the ghost stories told during Christmas time are actually about or happen to be within
that's
Christmas.
true. That's
They're
true.
just scary stories. And one of the arguments that I have here as to the reason why ghost stories on Christmas is because, as you know, Justin, I call the season, the winter season, the dead season.
Yeah.
Just the dead season. And what more, like, what's the most common thing we know that happens to be dead? People, right? I know that's morbid, but it's true. Um, so naturally, you would talk about ghosts in these creepy environments. I mean, if you've ever sat outside, I mean, for those of you who live down south, south of where any snow could be. So if you're in the, in the U.S. and you're living in Florida, you probably don't see snow very often, if at all. And if you've never left Florida, you should, just for the fact that you're in Florida. But when you have a fresh snowfall, and we're talking about anywhere from a half inch to an inch of fall, and then you step outside at night, everything's kind of lit up and glowing, much like this specter that would be standing in front of you if one was standing in front of you. Um, but then there's just dead silence because every single sound that happens, whether in the trees or someone's house or whatever, it gets absorbed by the snow. So you have this eerie, dead silent, glowing like atmosphere around you. And it's the perfect setup for a ghost story. And I think that's one of the many reasons why people would tell ghost stories, especially if you consider back in ancient times, of sitting around a bonfire and it's snow on the ground, the full moon is out. The cloud, if you're in the northern hemisphere, is probably really cloudy, just gray skies and dark. And it's like just the perfect place and atmosphere to be sharing these kind of things. Uh, and again, like, we called them Christmas ghost stories, whether or not they were actually told on Christmas Day. I know that was one aspect of the ghost stories. They were told, especially in Europe, during on Christmas Day, but they also happen around Christmas as well.
If I'm not mistaken, um, isn't that what Sam Hain was kind of all about? It was a celebration of the death of the old to bring the new.
Yeah, more or less. Are we talking about? Are we actually talking about Samhain, or are we talking about like the show, like the you said Samhain, so I'm like, wait, are we talking about the
Well,
actual?
that's how the English people pronounce it, Samhain.
Ah, got it.
Samhain, yeah, the tradition of Samhain, I believe, was to celebrate basically wintertime coming.
Right.
Um, and it's interesting that again, as modernized people, we hate the winter because you're stuck inside. You don't get light a lot of times, sunlight specifically, um, and it's just a dreary time. Where in the old days we used to celebrate it. All right, next one. And I didn't include A Christmas Carol in this list because we've already discussed it. Um, get my next slide up. Okay, so the next one is Bring Me a Light by Jane Margaret Hooper. It was published in 1861. The majority of these are novellas or short stories. Now, everybody knows Snow White's stepmother, but that woman had nothing on the vengeful Lady Henrietta. This story details how her evil deeds poisoned her family, her home, for generations. The next one is the ghosts summons. It's really hard to say.
That's a
By
good one.
Ada Buisson. I probably butchered that. It was published in 1868, and it's about a doctor who's hired to witness a man's final hours. Now, I mean, in this day and age, all doctors are usually there in the final hours for the most part, or they're at least proclaiming time of death.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've not
Um,
read the Ghost Summons, but I can imagine what the story probably entails. Because when you consider the number of accounts that we've heard of, that we've had people on with us in the past who were EMTs, who worked in hospitals, who were cops, who would witness things around people who were either dying or had died. And we've heard tales from people who unfortunately were going to pass away. And these are tales in which they start seeing ghosts and shadows and various weird things prior to their death. And you have to wonder, like, what that could actually be. Is that the afterlife starting to reach out, starting to show itself because you're on the cusp of the veil? Or is it something else? Or is it just the person who's unfortunately in a rough place, whose mind is kind of wandering and just opening itself up to maybe its own ideas and beliefs, and it's manifesting those things and they're not real? Or is there something to it? And now we know people who have witnessed things alongside these people. We've talked to EMTs who had someone on their deathbed in the back of the ambulance, and they would see some sort of spiritual shadow-like creature. And I say creature not as in a monster, but creature as in just a humanoid figure of some sort, who that kind of entered the area and was just hanging around. And it kind of it makes me think of what this story could possibly be, the ghost summons, because it's possible if this doctor is there to witness it, he probably was witnessing some of the things that this person who's in his final hour is probably also witnessing.
well, and it's interesting that you say that because I mean, you kind of see that in A Christmas Carol, although Scrooge is not confronted by a doctor on the time of his death, but his own mortality and his own ethics. And in the end, he dies alone.
Mhm.
And that brings up a good point too. Even though the doctor is there, I didn't again, I didn't read the story either, but almost seems like this guy is dying alone, so the doctor is there so that he doesn't. The next one, and this one is very fascinating to tell during the Christmas season, but Christmas is the time of forgiving, of course. The Kit Bag by Algernon Blackwood was published in 1908, and this is a story to remind us of why it's a bad idea to defend a murderer. Now, I don't know if that means like in court or to be close to somebody and you're defending the fact that they are a murderer.
That's a good question. I don't really know. But I will tell you one.
I wish we would have had more time to read these stories. I've never heard of any of them, so it fascinates me that A Christmas Carol, which I get, it's based during the Christmas season, so that's why it's popular. But I wish that these would have been more popular to read, even when we were growing up for like English class.
Oh yeah, I mean, unfortunately, English class. So there's so many stories that I had to read that were really good. Of course, Catcher in the Rye and The Old Man in the Sea is one of my favorites. Probably my number one favorite book that I still look for online every once in a while and just haven't bothered to buy it. Is Chocolate Fever. I know this is a rabbit trail, but I have to share it because I love this book so much. It's basically about a kid who all he does is eat chocolate 24/7. And so it's like this whole thing about his life and what's happening to him basically inside out because he eats chocolate chips, chocolate pretzels, chocolate cookies, chocolate milk, chocolate cake. And like, it's my favorite book because all I could think about is eating chocolate. And it's like, dude.
Wait, is this an origin story for Willy Wonka?
I don't know. No, but it should be.
Anyways, continue. Or was that?
No, I think that was it. I was just reminiscing.
The next one is Between the Lights by E.F. Benson. It was published in 1912. It was basically Christmas croquet and hallucinations.
Fascinating.
Which, again, going back to a Christmas Carol, everything that Scrooge went through could be explained by an old man's hallucinations, again, coming to terms with his own mortality.
Right. But at least this is the first story that we've come across that has Christmas in not the title, but at least in the synopsis.
The story. Yeah. Well, and in the title, kind of Between the Lights, I mean, everybody knows putting up Christmas lights.
Yeah, but like when I read Between the Lights, I legitimately thought UFOs. And when I read the Kit Bag, I've only like up until you said it, Kit Bag, I kept reading Kit Kat.
So yeah,
I kept
getting confused with that too. Next up is Smee by A.M. Barrage, and it was published in 1931. It's a variation of hide and seek goes awry when 12 players find themselves counting their number as 13. Which is odd because how could you be miscounting? And I'm assuming this happens throughout the entire book.
I should think so.
Or story. Now, the last one is much more recent. It's called Dark Christmas by Jeanette Winterson. And this is a contemporary tale. An idyllic Christmas vacation is troubled by the appearance of a manger, and footsteps in the empty attic. Now that's what I call a Christmas ghost story.
Yeah, I'm going to read that one. That one I'm interested in. I mean, I would like to check out a couple of these, but that one actually seems kind of spooky.
Now, all of these stories can be found in the Valancourt book of Victorian Christmas Ghost Stories. And I would love to get the editor, Tara Moore, on to talk more about this maybe next year. Um, because I've never heard of there being a collection anywhere.
Right. I mean, we've looked so many times over the years for collections of ghost stories, and nothing ever existed. Do you happen to know what year that was published, though? Her book?
It was well that was published a while back,
Okay.
but they kind of reintroduced it, and she had edited it, and I believe they added the Dark Christmas into it.
Okay. Well, the only reason I ask is we have looked for that numerous times over the years. Not that book, obviously, but just a book in general that would give us all of these stories, and we wanted to bring that person on. And this is yet another one of those circumstances, depending on the date in which it was published, that it may not have existed in our original timeline. But
Going
now
back to the Mandela effect.
it's becoming more and more prominent. Everywhere I look, I'm like, what the heck? Like this, I told you some of this stuff like off air. It just doesn't make sense to me. It's hard to fathom. But like how many times? I mean, literally over 15 years that we've looked for something and only could come up with like the rawest, most bare information on ghost stories. And now all of a sudden there's a book which was published years ago, apparently. It don't make sense.
Well, I was going to ask you about this. Um, I think I have before. Have you heard of the 1988 anomaly theory?
No.
That the world went through a catastrophic event in 1988, and we were that was basically going to wipe out humanity. And I don't know all the details, but basically we're just now catching up on to everything because we're seeing these Mandela effects because we're either in a simulation or I'll have to do more research on it. But basically, the world kind of ended in 1988, and that's why we're seeing these Mandela effects because we're reliving basically from 1988 on in some other reality or simulation.
Yeah, see, I don't know. There's so many theories about the whole idea of parallel universes and timelines and Earths and et cetera, that it can't all be correct, right? So whether or not that's true, I don't know. Again, it's like that idea of um, when you're driving down the road and you have the intrusive thought that, oh, if I just drive off this bridge, well, somewhere in some other alternate universe, you did just that. You had the thought, but one version of you also did it and then committed to it. But then there's this belief that when that other person happens to die in that parallel universe, it smashes into a new Earth opposite, right? Parallel to it. And it's kind of confusing because like if the Earths start to merge and you start to merge with other versions of yourself, then eventually like there's a limit. Like we're not infinite. We can't be if you're just constantly merging into yourself for every time something gets screwed up. Um, it's concerning the Mandela effect. That was one of the stories that I forget who would share. It might have been a TikTok or something that you sent me. I think it was actually where when someone dies, they are snapped into their spirit is snapped into a parallel universe or parallel timeline where they merge with themselves in that timeline
Oh, I've seen
along
several videos, so I probably did, yeah.
okay along with a number of other people. And that's why there's like this mass belief that like, oh well, you know it wasn't the Bernstein Bears, it was the Bernstein Bears or the whatever. But it doesn't make sense either because that means there's some sort of control as to when a certain number of people die, they all go to the same parallel timeline. But that would mean that those individuals would have to die at the same time every single time that they would die in order to keep shifting into the same parallel timelines. They can't be sporadic. They can't be just random
Say that
because
last part one more time. My brain got confused.
so So basically, what this person was saying is that when you die, your spirit or whatever shifts into a parallel timeline,
Okay.
and
Yep.
then you witness the Mandela effect. But then there's also a pretty decent sized number of other people who witness the Mandela effect, that same Mandela effect in that same timeline as you. But then that's to argue that those people would have had to die at the same time as you and all shifted to the same timeline as you. But if there's infinite timelines, then it should be random as to what timeline that person ends up in, unless there's some sort of order to it. Say there's
Yeah.
say there's 10 people who all died at the same time. They go into a parallel timeline, they witness the Mandela effect, and then 3 of them die, go to a different timeline, and then the rest die and go to that same timeline at some other, some distant future, and then suddenly they're all in the same place again. Exactly. It's messed up. I don't know.
I think you're really overthinking this.
I mean, yes.
So, out of all those story descriptions, would you read all of those stories? Do you think?
Yeah. I mean, especially if the novellas, I love novellas. I get so bored real quick with like long novels. So anything that's like a short story or novella that I could read in an hour or two, absolutely. And they all seem pretty interesting.
You're a pretty quick reader then, because it'd take more than an hour for me, even for a
For a
novella.
novella? Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So here's my question to you. Do you feel we should bring this tradition back, and why?
Well, yes, because I mean, I feel like you lose a piece of history, and every time we lose a piece of history, um, well, that's just sad. For lack of a better word, I mean, it's true. It's just sad. Like, there's a lot of really cool things that used to be common, within history, and they've all been lost because people want to move on from, in this case, an oral tradition of telling ghost stories, and where there's family and friends all gathered together, to let's sit in front of the TV and watch a Christmas Story for the 982nd time.
Hey, don't you badmouth the
Hey,
Christmas.
I'm just saying. I mean, I do it too. I'm going to do it again this Christmas Eve. I'm just saying. When you consider how many Christmas, well, that's at least 38 Christmas Eves, right? So I've watched it a minimum of 38 times,
43.
but I've watched it multiple times on Christmas Eve. So
Actually, technically, it came out in 1983, so 41.
okay. But yeah, no, I think that the stories should come back, and it should allow people to pull away from the media, get away from the commercialization of what modern Christmas is all about. You think about how people used to gather around the radio, and they would tune in, they would listen in the evenings after work. That was a time where families spent time together. When I was growing up, families spent time together. We would watch the X-Files together. We'd talk about it and stuff. That doesn't happen anymore. Now we're all in separate rooms. I mean, in this case, separate houses nowadays, obviously. We're older. But we rarely talk about the same things, or even watch the same things. Like, there's a couple things, my sister and I watch that we could talk about here and there. But for the most part, it's just, as we grow older, we kind of distance ourselves and drift away from the original tradition of the family gathering. And even more so nowadays, because kids are just sitting on their phones or playing video games. Statistically speaking, kids these days are way less healthy than they were when you and I were growing up, because they're sitting on their couch day after day playing video games, while you and I were outside running around, playing tag, German Spotlight, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think bringing the ghost story scary ghost stories back to Christmas time would be a great benefit. In one, just building families and relationships again, and two, it'll help to re-nourish the tradition, the original tradition, remind people of what life was like prior to the television and the phones and the distance.
I'll add to that with we're losing the arts in our society now. writing, music, uh, visual arts. A lot of people are doing graphic art, which is fine, great. But we're losing a lot of that now. And if for some reason an EMP hit today, people I feel would lose their mind.
Oh yeah, hundred
Not
percent.
go back to old traditions. They would just literally start killing each other and looting and everything else. Um,
Oh yeah, there'd be riots and fires on, you know, uh, innocent properties. You know, people who've
yeah.
done nothing. I mean, we see. Yeah, that's political. We're not to get one there. We don't do that here.
I do have to say though that Hollywood has started doing this in a sense because um, how many years has it been since the Krampus movie came out?
Oh,
It's
it came
been
out in
like
2015, 2016.
has it been that long already?
Yeah, I was in
Um,
college.
okay. And then was it last year or the year before they came out with a bad I think it's called A Bad Christmas. Basically, Santa Claus goes on a rampage to save this
Oh
kid.
yeah. That's a great movie.
I've yet to watch that
It's hilarious.
or Krampus movie.
You haven't watched
Um,
Krampus yet?
mm-mm.
I'm
I bel
disbanding. We're done with Paratruth. The show's ending.
For those of you that don't know, he threatens us on a daily basis when we're doing the show.
One day I'm going to hold to it. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. We tried to leave, and how long did it take us before we came back?
I mean, this time of year, that's pretty decent for us.
Well, before that, it was a couple of years
That's
because
true. That's
I
true.
disbanded my show, and it was a couple of years after that. Um, but yeah, I would love to see this come back. If nothing else, is as to bring families together again. Um, whether you're doing it around a fire, if you're just doing it as a tradition at home, whatever the case may be, I seriously feel this should come back just because that's what the point was. It was to bring the family close, physically close together, as well as enjoying something that brought um I I don't know if it brought joy to them. It would bring joy to me.
It brought fear, probably.
and,
It's all of those
maybe
stories.
that was part of the point too, because I didn't see anything in researching this that it said, it was to teach a lesson,
Right.
but it's a very good point.
Well, so these are the reasons that you and I both think we should bring the scary story back to Christmas. But how about a reason or two as to why we shouldn't bring scary stories back?
Scarring little ones.
Oh, yeah, I suppose that could be one. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, I suppose that's
I
one of
mean,
them.
think of your nieces telling them a really scary story.
I'm try, dude. Like I want them to see scary stuff.
Actually, I take that back. Addie might enjoy it. I don't know about the others,
That's
but
fair.
Addie might enjoy
That's fair.
it.
I think the one thing is, even if the tradition came back, the internet still exists, media still exists, and I can only imagine around Christmas time the amount of stories that would be shared upon the web, and those stories become believed by such a mass amount of people that they would actually start to become realized and start to exist in our modern world, much like many of the entities that have existed after creepypasta posts or some other way in which monsters develop out of nothing.
I just thought of a reason to bring it back. I know we're looking for non, but for those that can't gather together normally, physically, do it via Zoom or whatever. Another way to kind of bring the family together, even if you're not close physically.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, Oh gosh, what other reason not to? I can't think of anything.
The
Maybe
other
you
reason,
go.
and for those of you, I apologize, probably because your family's dysfunctional. Probably a bad idea to bring the family together in that case. Unless
And
you
then
guys
start
can
telling
manage
really
something,
horrible stories that
right?
just crumbles the entire get
If you
together.
if that's the case, you want to get together, you should probably bring a therapist. I'm just saying, add them to the Christmas list.
um, yeah, I don't have anything else as far as not bringing why we shouldn't bring it back.
You know, I really only had the mass hysteria one, so
That's a very valid point, though. I mean, pretty much a lot of the things we talk about
I mean,
can be attributed to mass hysteria in a sense, but I think that's a cop out too.
I think yeah, it could be. Here's the thing that I noticed though, in regards to mass hysteria or just mass uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, can't think of the word, but basically creating something out of nothing because a group of people believe in it. And one thing that I notice is that the majority of things that seem to come from nothing or come from stories all happen to be dark entities, scary things.
Hmm.
How many people, or children at least, believe in Santa Claus? And I've never once seen a story about Santa Claus actually flying and being, having photos and videos and all this taken of it. But then we have the Slender Man, and we have all those things and more. Like it's like there are entities out there that are waiting, they're listening, trying to find a way to bring fear to people because fear is one of those things that keep you away from acknowledging God, acknowledging the good. Uh, and so when you're delving into these stories that are scary and enough people start to believe in it, well, now whatever entity's out there lurking has a manifestation power to create it, to become it, and start to use that fear to pull you away from any chance of hope and even drive you into doing some serious harm, such as in the Slenderman murders or almost murders, I'll say. Um, and I think that's something that's just really intriguing because there are plenty of good stories that people believe in. Santa Claus, Frosty the Snowman, Rudolph. I've never seen any of those three. I'm just saying. It's weird. Krampus, though. Krampus hasn't shown up yet, and that's surprising.
Yeah, that we know of.
That we know
Maybe
of.
it's just not being reported.
Maybe. I want to meet Krampus.
You really need to get your movie script completely
Yes, I
done.
know. Well, it's done, and I've
Oh, it
submitted
is
it
done.
here.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
okay,
done. It's done.
okay. I couldn't remember if the last time we had talked about it, if you had finished it.
Yeah, no, it's done.
Um, because that would be a good one for a scary story to come out
Right.
during Christmas. Okay. Anything that we missed or that you thought of after the fact?
No, I don't think so. It's just, I always say that. I always say no, I don't think so. And then I continue talking. I should just say yes. Yes, I do have something to say. Um, that would make more sense. But I think I think it's important to bring back the tradition of telling ghost stories, and even if you're not telling them, at least reading some of them around Christmas time, uh,
And discussing them later.
and discussing them later. Take a look at some of the
Do it as a
stories
family.
that, yeah, take a look at some of the stories that Justin had shared here on the podcast. There will be a link as well, I'm sure, for those of you listening online that you can click on and find the books or whatever. Take a time to read that. Do yourself a favor and just see what some of these early writings were, and try to imagine yourself in that position. Think of yourself in the 1800s. What was it like to read this particular story? Think of yourself further back. Uh, ancient times, sitting around a fire or something. What was it like to read that story while it's snowing outside? And I think what's cool about that is it kind of enlightens you, all of us, to some bit. It connects you with a piece of history that otherwise you don't know and can't experience and have never lived. And when you do that, you just kind of fill a void, I think, uh, that we're disconnected from. And it's a reminder of where we came from.
100%. All right. I hope you all had a very good and happy Thanksgiving. We are getting into the Christmas season already. But we've got some really cool guests coming up. Next week, we're going to be having on Siddharth Ramakrishnan, who wrote Neuroscience of Tarot. And the week after that, we're going to be having on Tim Reborn, Scary Book of Christmas Lore, which Eric and I have done multiple episodes about different creatures that are linked to Christmas. So this will be fascinating to actually talk to somebody who's got a book out about it.
Who's actually an expert at the things that we talk about.
Right.
For Christmas.
And then that rolls us into our Christmas episode and our New Year's episode. And we're going to have a blast with that. And we hope you come along with us. Yeah. So until next week, where you'll find us same time, same channel. My name is Justin.
And I'm Eric. Peace.